An officer and his K-9 were patrolling the frozen woods, just another quiet sweep through the snow. Then came a sound neither expected. Not a scream, not a bark, just a tiny voice, barely above a whisper. "Please, don't make me leave them." There, beneath a dying pine, was a little girl in a red hoodie, holding two puppies close to her chest, her face red from cold, her eyes red from something deeper. That moment changed everything. For the officer, for his dog, and for a child who believed she had been left behind. What happened next will restore your faith in second chances, and remind you that sometimes the bravest rescues happen far from sirens. Deep in the silence, where hearts meet. Snowfield, Wyoming, wasn't a town known for mercy. In winter, especially late January, the mountains closed their fists around the town like a weary boxer refusing to yield. The cold here didn't simply sting. It settled deep into the bones, whispered through the wind like old ghosts. That morning, the thermometer at the sheriff's outpost read 14 degrees Celsius. The sky, a dull iron gray, loomed heavy with the weight of another storm. In the distance, pine-covered ridges faded into whiteness, and every sound was muffled under the thick blanket of snow. Officer Lucas Browning moved quietly through the powder-draped forest that rimmed the northeast edge of town. At 39, Lucas had the build of a man once athletic, broad-shouldered, with a strength forged more by grief than by muscle. His dark hair had begun to retreat, curling slightly beneath the brim of his sheriff-issued knit cap. His jaw, strong but rarely smiling, was framed by 2 days' worth of stubble and eyes that had once shone with mischief, now dulled by years of silence. Lucas hadn't spoken much to anyone since Emma, his wife, passed 2 winters ago. Cancer took her piece by piece, like snow melting from the eaves, slow, quiet, and cruel. She had been the town's only veterinarian, known for wearing mismatched wool socks and quoting Shakespeare to injured dogs. Since her death, Lucas had retreated to the outskirts of town, living alone in a modest log cabin he and Emma had once restored together. Now, he walked patrols mostly for himself, for something to do that wasn't remembering. Beside him trotted Scout, a 6-year-old German Shepherd and retired K-9 unit. Unlike the usual black and tan variety, Scout's coat was mottled with silver streaks that gave him the look of a dog caught mid-transformation into something wild. One ear stood alert while the other flopped, the result of an old altercation with a raccoon that Scout had won, but not without cost. His right eye was amber and sharp, the left cloudy with the fading scars of shrapnel from his time with Lucas in Urban Narcotics Patrol. Scout was no longer an official working dog, but he never forgot the job, and Lucas, try as he might, never stopped needing him. They had just turned around a bend where the snow deepened near a gully when Scout stopped. His body tensed, not the stance of prey or danger, but something subtler. His ears lifted, his nostrils flared. Then he let out a short bark low, muffled as if to say, "Here." Lucas paused, hand on his belt, then followed the direction Scout was sniffing toward. There were footprints in the snow, small, uneven, half-covered by flurries. Not adult. Children. No adult tracks nearby. His gut turned cold in a way that had nothing to do with the wind. Scout bolted ahead, his paws silent on the snowpack. Lucas followed as best he could, boots sinking with each stride, heart thudding faster than the exertion demanded. They passed a ridge of fallen trees, then entered a grove of thin pines' bare branches scratching the sky like pleading fingers. There, at the base of a sagging pine whose needles had gone brittle brown, was a splash of color. A red hoodie, too thin for the weather, wrapped tightly around the small frame of a girl. She couldn't have been older than 6. Her blonde hair was wild with static and ice, cheeks raw from cold, lips cracked white. In her lap, nestled like trembling stones, were 2 puppies, barely a few weeks old. One was chocolate brown with a white blaze on its nose, the other dusty gray with floppy ears and eyes barely open. They shivered against her ribs, pressed under her arms as if the little girl were their only son. Lucas froze. This was no accident. She hadn't wandered off. She had been left. Scout approached first, always the one to break the ice. He lowered his head and stepped with deliberate care. The girl didn't flinch. She didn't move at all. But when Scout let out a soft whine and gently nudged his muzzle against her wrist, her fingers twitched. Slowly, like reaching into memory, she patted his head. Her voice, barely a whisper, cracked like thin ice. "I didn't want to leave them." Lucas dropped to one knee, keeping his voice even. "Hey, sweetheart. My name's Lucas. That's Scout. We're here to help." She blinked slowly but said nothing more. Lucas unzipped his parka, pulling it off despite the cold, and wrapped it around her and the dogs. She was all bones under the hoodie, her frame too light, skin too pale. The puppies let out weak whines and nestled deeper into the warmth. He pressed his radio, but there was no signal this far out. No use. He'd have to bring her back himself. "What's your name?" he asked gently, adjusting his coat tighter around her. Still no answer. Her eyes were too old. Lucas had seen that look before, in men returning from war, in widows at funerals. She didn't need a name to be real. She just needed to be held. Lucas looked around. No signs of adult presence. No supplies. Just that girl, those pups, and a tree that looked like it too had given up. Scout circled them, alert, protective, tail low and steady. "We'll get you warm," Lucas whispered, lifting the girl slowly. She didn't resist. The puppies stayed tucked in her hoodie. Scout led the way back through the snow, his steps sure and quiet. The storm had begun to rise again. Winds picking up like breath held too long. But for now, under that tree, something else stirred a spark not yet snuffed out. Lucas didn't know her name, but he knew the feeling in his chest wasn't grief this time, it was purpose. By the time Lucas reached the cabin, the storm had started howling in full voice. Wind twisted through the trees like a living thing, tossing up white spirals that stung his face and threatened to bury his tracks behind him. The red-hooded girl had stopped shivering, but that didn't comfort him. Stillness could mean danger. The two puppies were nestled deep in his coat now, wrapped in an old flannel scarf he had stuffed in his backpack months ago and never removed. Scout walked slightly ahead, ears flattened, eyes sweeping left and right like a sentry who had never quite left the battlefield. The cabin came into view, a squat wooden structure resting against the slope of a hill, its roof now thick with snow. Smoke hadn't risen from its chimney in days, but the shape of it still gave Lucas something close to relief. He kicked at the drift built up on the porch and unlocked the door with a gloved hand, careful not to jostle the girl as she clung to him. The hinges creaked, familiar and tired. Inside, the air was bitter. He moved quickly, setting the girl down on the worn couch draped with a quilt that still faintly smelled of cedar and lavender. He tossed firewood into the old iron stove, struck a match and blew gently on the flame until it caught. The fire crackled, licking the cold away inch by inch. Scout trotted toward the hearth, then circled back, checking on the girl, then the pups. The girl sat stiffly, arms still tight around her knees. Her face was flushed, but her eyes held the same dull shine like the frost hadn't melted inside her yet. Lucas crouched in front of her. "I'm going to check the puppies, okay? Just want to make sure they're all right." She gave the faintest nod. He gently reached for them. The brown one squirmed heavier than expected. A girl, barely 6 weeks old by his guess. The gray one, a male, sneezed as Lucas lifted him, then buried his nose into Lucas's wrist. They were cold, but not hypothermic. Not yet. As he examined the pups, Lucas's eyes drifted to the cabinet in the corner, the old white-painted one with peeling drawers, where Emma had kept all her supplies. A label still clung to the front, faded letters reading Vet Emergency. His throat tightened. He stood and opened it. Inside, tucked neatly in plastic bins, were gauze rolls, antiseptic, syringes, tiny thermometers, and a worn leather stethoscope. Emma had packed it with the kind of love reserved for creatures who couldn't speak for themselves. Lucas could almost hear her voice now, teasing but warm. "Not all heroes have 2 legs, Lou." He took out a thermometer, knelt beside the couch and turned to the girl. "What about you? Can I check your temperature?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. As he gently checked her forehead with his hand, he noticed how thin her arms were. Too thin. He didn't need a scale to know she'd gone hungry. He wanted to ask her name again, but something told him now wasn't the time. Names could wait. Safety couldn't. The fire had started to fill the cabin with warmth. Lucas went to the back room and retrieved a pair of thermal socks, still sealed in plastic from a Christmas he never got around to celebrating. He also found a soft navy sweater and returned with them. "Here, these are warm. You can change when you're ready." She took the clothes silently. Lucas busied himself with the stove, giving her privacy. Scout lay near the door, head resting on his front paws but eyes still trained on the girl. When Lucas turned back around, she had changed. The sweater engulfed her like a blanket, and the socks peeked over her tiny ankles. She looked smaller now, curled up against the arm of the couch, the two pups nestled close to her chest. One of her hands was tangled in Scout's thick fur. Lucas exhaled, tension draining from his shoulders for the first time since he'd found her. Outside, snow battered the cabin like a drumbeat. The windows rattled. He knew they weren't going anywhere tonight, not until the plows cut through or dispatch could send backup. He reheated a can of chicken soup on the stovetop and poured it into a mug, then brought it over. "It's hot. Go slow." She sat up and accepted it carefully, sipping as steam curled around her flushed cheeks, still silent but a little less haunted. Lucas watched her, then glanced at the pups. They needed names. It didn't feel right calling them Brown One and Gray One all night. "How about Muffin?" he said, pointing at the chubby brown pup with the white nose. "And this little rascal," he gently tapped the gray one's paw, "maybe Boots?" The girl blinked. Then quietly she whispered, "Muffin and Boots." It was the first real thing she'd said. Lucas smiled, just slightly. "Yeah, that fits." Scout looked up at him from the floor as if to say, "Told you they'd talk eventually." Lucas leaned back in the old rocking chair, arms crossed, watching the trio sleep. The girl curled under the quilt, pups nestled in her arms, Scout lying lengthwise across the foot of the couch, his back pressed lightly to hers. The wind outside screamed like a wounded beast, but inside there was only the hiss of the fire and the slow, deep breathing of things that had survived one more night. Morning came slowly in the mountains, light leaking through thick gray clouds like reluctant hope. The snow had stopped sometime during the night, but its silence still clung to everything. Lucas sat up in his armchair, the fire now low and crackling. Scout lay sprawled by the door, head resting on his paws, alert despite the relaxed posture. On the couch, the little girl had shifted in her sleep, her red hoodie bunched beneath the navy sweater he'd given her. Muffin and Boots were curled against her chest, rising and falling with each breath. Lucas rubbed his eyes and stood, joints aching from a night of half-sleep. He poured himself a mug of lukewarm coffee from the thermos he'd prepped the night before and glanced out the frosted window. Snow blanketed the woods in a deceptive calm. But something inside him still churned. He couldn't shake the feeling that the girl's appearance hadn't been an accident. He stepped outside, Scout padding behind him. The snow crunched beneath their boots and paws, brittle and clean. Lucas turned toward the spot in the woods where they'd found her the day before. It wasn't far. The air was sharper now, the storm having passed but left behind its bitter breath. They moved carefully, retracing their steps until they reached the dying pine tree. Lucas scanned the area again, and then he saw it. To the left of the clearing, partially obscured by fresh snow and broken branches, was a print. Boot-shaped, adult-sized. The heel was deeper, indicating a limp or a heavy step. Lucas crouched beside it, brushing snow away. More prints followed, leading toward the ridge, then abruptly disappearing into a patch of flattened brush. Scout sniffed along the trail, his posture changing more alert, more cautious. Then he stopped, tail still, ears tilted forward. Lucas stepped closer and spotted something half buried in the snow. He knelt and gently pulled it free. A crumpled piece of paper, faded ink, wrinkled from moisture. He unfolded it carefully. "Don't look for me. She'll be safer with someone kind." Lucas stared at it for a long moment. His jaw tightened. The writing was rushed but legible. There was no signature. He exhaled slowly, the steam of his breath curling into the air like a silent curse. Whoever left the girl here, left Ellie, did it deliberately. He turned to Scout. "Let's go," he muttered, and they made their way back toward the cabin. Inside, the girl was sitting up, the quilt wrapped around her like a shell. She had taken the two puppies onto her lap and was brushing their fur with gentle, absent strokes. Her face was clearer now, cheeks less pale, lips less cracked. When Lucas entered, she looked up. "You found something," she said quietly. Lucas blinked. "How did you—" "I saw your face," she said simply. As if that explained everything, he set the paper on the table and crouched in front of her. "Can I ask your name?" She hesitated. Then softly, "Ellie." "Hi, Ellie, I'm Lucas." He pointed to the German shepherd by the door. "That's Scout. You already know Muffin and Boots." She nodded, eyes dropping back to the puppies. Lucas took a breath. "Ellie, do you know where your mom is?" Ellie didn't answer. Her fingers stilled on Boots' back. After a moment, she whispered, "She was sad a lot, mostly at night. She didn't yell, just looked through people." Lucas nodded, saying nothing. He'd seen that look before, after the funeral, in the mirror. "She said people were after us, said we couldn't go home." Scout walked over and pressed his head under Ellie's hand. She smiled faintly and scratched behind his ears. Lucas stood, moved to the old rotary phone on the counter, and dialed the number for the sheriff's office. The line crackled before connecting. "Nancy, it's Lucas." On the other end, a voice answered firm but low, like gravel smoothed by patience. Sheriff Nancy Griggs had been with Fremont County's department for over 20 years. A tall, angular woman in her early 60s, she had silver-streaked brown hair tied in a tight braid and eyes sharp enough to cut through lies like a blade. Her no-nonsense demeanor was known throughout the county, and she carried herself like a mountain lion, graceful, lean, and not to be underestimated. "Lucas," she said, "tell me you're calling for something other than weather complaints." "I found a girl, around 6, maybe younger, red hoodie, was out near the ridge alone, had 2 puppies with her." There was a pause. "Alive?" "Yeah. Cold, scared. She's warming up at the cabin now." "Did she say anything?" "She told me her name, Ellie, but she clammed up when I asked about her mom. Found a note nearby. Says someone left her there on purpose." Another pause. "I think I might know who she is," Nancy said finally. "There was a missing persons report 2 months ago. Single mom. Name was Marie Ellis. Had a daughter named Ellie. They were living out of a trailer near Pine Hollow. Marie didn't show up to her night shift, and the place was cleaned out by the time we arrived." Lucas looked over at the girl, now lying back against the couch with Scout curled protectively by her feet. "I'll fax you the file," Nancy continued, "but be careful. If Marie's still alive, someone might have scared her off good." "Understood." He hung up and walked to the wood stove, throwing in another log. The cabin creaked with wind, but the fire held strong. Ellie looked up. "Will I stay here?" "For now," Lucas said gently, "until we find out where your mom is." "Okay," she whispered. That night, as the sun set behind the ridge and the wind howled through the trees like a voice left behind, Lucas sat by the fire, Scout dozing at his feet. Ellie was asleep again, one arm slung over Muffin, the other hand resting in Scout's fur. And on the table, the crumpled note lay between a badge and a forgotten cup of coffee. The wind was calmer that morning, but the cold was sharper, like it had learned how to cut deeper. Outside the cabin, the forest lay blanketed in snow that sparkled faintly under the pale winter sun. Inside, warmth slowly returned to the wooden walls, coaxed into life by the steady crackle of the stove. Lucas moved with a deliberate stillness, placing a steaming mug of tea on the table near the couch where Ellie sat. She hadn't spoken much since telling him her name. She sat cross-legged beneath the thick quilt, one hand tangled in Scout's fur, the other gently rubbing behind Muffin's tiny ears. Boots, the gray pup, lay asleep on her lap, snoring quietly. Lucas watched her from the kitchen, giving her space. He was used to silence. His own grief had made him fluent in it. But the silence around Ellie was different. It wasn't numbness. It was defense, like she was still hiding in some invisible place inside herself. Eventually, he sat down across from her, elbows on his knees. "You don't have to talk," he said softly, "but I'll listen if you want to." At first, there was nothing. Then, without moving her gaze from the fire, she said, "She cried a lot, at night." Lucas stayed quiet. "She thought I was asleep, but I could hear her. She'd sit in the bathroom with the door closed and whisper things like, 'I can't do this,' or 'They'll find us.' Sometimes she said names. Sometimes just numbers." Lucas's chest tightened. Ellie continued, her voice distant. "She used to laugh. We had pancakes on Sundays. She'd sing off-key and dance with the dogs. But then she stopped." "Why?" Lucas asked gently. "One day, she opened the door real slow and told me to pack my bag. She didn't say where we were going, just said we couldn't stay. She wrapped Boots in a towel and put Muffin in her backpack." Ellie's fingers tightened around Scout's fur. He shifted slightly, pressing closer. "We walked for a long time. I don't remember where. Just snow. Then she pointed to the tree and said, 'Wait here, I'll come back.'" Lucas leaned forward, his voice low. "Did she say anything else?" "She said she was sorry." Her voice cracked. "She said I'd be safer without her." Lucas swallowed hard. He didn't move to touch her, he knew better, but Scout did. The old German shepherd rose slowly, turned, and gently rested his head on Ellie's thigh. She curled toward him instantly, burying her face in his neck. The moment stretched long and quiet. The fire popped. Boots stirred but didn't wake. Lucas stood slowly and crossed to the stove. He added another log, watching the flame leap higher. Part of him wanted to call Nancy again, but part of him knew Ellie needed to breathe before he brought in the rest of the world. He returned with a new pair of wool socks and placed them beside her without a word. Ellie eventually peeked over Scout's ear and gave the faintest nod. The day passed without much else said. Lucas made soup, she ate some. The puppies played on a folded blanket by the hearth. Ellie watched them with a look that hovered between joy and heartbreak. But as dusk approached, something shifted. From deep in the woods came the faint rumble of an engine low, slow, like something heavy moving where it shouldn't. It was distant, but in the mountains, sound carried like secrets. Scout's ears pricked instantly. He rose without a sound, his posture no longer relaxed. He moved toward the door, body tense, head low, listening. Lucas noticed the change immediately. He followed Scout's gaze but saw nothing through the frosted window. Just trees, still and silent. But Scout didn't move from his post. His eyes stayed fixed. His tail stayed low. Ellie sat up straighter, clutching the edge of the quilt. Her fingers trembled. "It's okay," Lucas said softly. "You're safe here." Scout glanced back at him, then returned to watching the door. Outside, the engine sound faded into nothing. Inside, the fire flickered, casting long shadows across the wooden floor, and for the first time since arriving, Ellie whispered without being asked. "He always came in a truck, loud one, with a dent in the side." Lucas met Scout's eyes, but neither of them said anything else. The cold had crept back into the world overnight. A heavy fog clung low to the forest floor, rolling over the snow in ghost-like wisps. The sky above was iron gray, the kind that held back light like a withheld truth. Lucas stood outside the cabin, his breath visible in the still air. Scout was at his side, unmoving, ears up, nose twitching. The dog had been on edge since the previous evening, ever since the engine sound drifted across the trees like a distant warning. Lucas scanned the ridgeline. The trees stood still, branches heavy with frost. Nothing moved. Then he saw him. At first, the figure blended with the trees, a shape barely noticeable, hunched and hesitant. Then, slowly, it stepped into clearer view. A man, maybe late 40s, stood just beyond the tree line, half hidden behind a cluster of pine. He wore a tan jacket stained with mud, and his jeans were torn at one knee. His beard was uneven, patchy, with streaks of gray. A bruise darkened the left side of his face, swollen beneath the eye. His posture was both defensive and searching, like a cornered animal trying to act like a human. Scout let out a low, steady growl. Lucas didn't move. He watched the man, studied his body language, the way his eyes darted toward the cabin, then quickly away. He was pale, jittery, lips chapped and twitching. Lucas stepped down from the porch. "Can I help you?" he called, his voice firm but not aggressive. The man flinched at the sound. Then, without replying, he turned and retreated into the woods. Lucas didn't pursue him. Not yet. Instead, he returned inside, where Ellie sat curled on the couch, still wrapped in the navy sweater. She had heard the growl. Lucas could tell by the tension in her shoulders. He sat across from her, quiet for a beat, then asked, "Ellie, have you ever seen that man before?" Ellie's face paled. Her grip tightened around Muffin, who squirmed slightly under the pressure. "He found us once," she whispered. Lucas leaned forward slowly. "Who is he?" She didn't answer, but her lips formed the word. Dean. She said it like it tasted wrong. Lucas felt something shift in his chest. The name confirmed what he already feared. Dean Halverson. He hadn't seen the man in over a year, not since the county filed a domestic disturbance report against him on behalf of a woman named Marie Ellis. That report went nowhere. No bruises documented, no witnesses, and Marie herself had refused to press charges. But there'd been whispers. A heated argument behind a closed trailer door, a scared child seen hiding in the back seat of a car, and then nothing. Marie vanished. Now, here he was, skulking in the woods behind Lucas's cabin, bruised and watching. Scout had returned to the door, sitting straight, his body tense but still. His eyes didn't leave the edge of the trees. That night, Lucas locked every window twice, pulled down the blinds, and loaded the revolver he kept in the drawer near the stove. He didn't tell Ellie more than she needed to hear. "If anything happens," he said, crouching beside her, "you stay close to Scout. You hear me?" Ellie nodded, small and silent. Lucas stayed awake well into the night, his chair angled so he could watch both the door and the girl. But sometime after midnight, exhaustion pulled at him and his eyes began to close. Then, thump. Scout stood instantly, one bark sharp and alert. Lucas jolted upright. Another sound something scraping along the side of the cabin. He moved quickly but silently, hand reaching for the revolver. He motioned for Scout to stay. But Scout didn't stay. The dog moved to the front door, nose pressed to the gap beneath it, body taut. He let out a quiet huff, then turned his head toward Lucas and gave a low, urgent whine. Lucas took position by the window, peered through the side slit. A shadow moved along the porch. Then another thump. He pulled open the door, weapon at his side, and Scout surged forward, paws skidding on ice just in time to catch the figure trying to pry at the doorframe with a rusted crowbar. Dean. The man stumbled backward, eyes wide. "Hey! It's not what it looks like," Scout snarled, advancing just enough to press Dean against the porch railing. Lucas stepped out, revolver down, but ready. "Get your hands where I can see them," Lucas ordered. Dean raised his hands. They shook. I just wanted to check if the girl was okay. You tried to break into my cabin." "I thought maybe she needed help," Dean muttered. "Funny," Lucas said coldly. "You ran earlier." Dean's mouth worked, but no sound came out. Lucas didn't cuff him. He didn't need to. The man was too broken, too desperate. But he did force him down the hill, marched him a quarter-mile to the ranger trail, then warned him, "Don't come back. Not near her, not near anyone." Dean stumbled off into the trees without another word. Back at the cabin, Scout took up position by the door and didn't sleep the rest of the night. And when Lucas sat back in his chair, Ellie whispered from the couch. "I heard him." Lucas turned. She was awake, wide-eyed, arms around both puppies. "I know that sound," she said. "The crowbar. He used it when Mom changed the locks." Lucas closed his eyes, jaw tight. "He's not going to hurt you," he said. She didn't answer, but her hand reached for Scout and held tight. The snow fell steady and silent, blanketing the cabin like a secret no one wanted to speak. Lucas sat at the table, absent-mindedly stirring a mug of coffee gone cold. Ellie lay curled up on the couch beside the fire, flanked by Muffin and Boots, their tiny chests rising and falling in rhythm. Scout, ever vigilant, lay by the door, one eye always slightly open, ears flicking with every groan of the wind outside. The storm had calmed, but Lucas hadn't. Something about the man, Dean, still stirred in his gut. The way Ellie froze when she heard his name. The way she went quiet even in her sleep, as if bracing for something. Scout stirred suddenly and stood. He sniffed the air, ears high. Then he turned and padded across the room toward the cot in the corner, the one where Lucas had dumped a stack of firewood earlier that day. The dog began sniffing the floor, nose pressing into the shadows behind the kindling bin. Then he growled, not out of aggression, but alertness. Lucas stood. "What is it?" Scout scratched once at the back of the cot, then looked at Lucas with a sharp huff. Lucas set the mug down and knelt, pulling aside a loose blanket draped over the frame. Behind the cot, partially wedged between a crate and the wall, was a small green canvas backpack, its straps worn and stiff with old dirt. He pulled it out slowly, eyes narrowing. Ellie sat up immediately on the couch, her eyes wide. "That's mine." Lucas turned. "Where did you get it?" She hesitated. "Mama packed it. She told me. If something happened and I got scared, I had to hide it, even from good people. She said the bag had our names inside." Lucas gently unzipped the front pocket. Inside were several items. Crumpled papers, a folded drawing of a girl, and 2 dogs under a tree, and a worn photograph, its edges curling from time and moisture. He unfolded the picture carefully. It was Ellie, maybe 4 years old, sitting on the lap of a smiling woman early 30s, long brown hair tied in a bun, laugh lines at the corners of her eyes. One hand rested over Ellie's heart. The bottom corner of the photo was ripped, taking half the woman's face with it. On the back, in faded blue pen, someone had written, "If something happens to me, find someone who remembers good things." Lucas stared at the words, the photograph trembling slightly in his hand. The handwriting was shaky but purposeful, someone in a hurry but trying to be clear. There were also vaccination records, a torn envelope with the name Marie Ellis handwritten in looping cursive, and a folded note in a child's scrawl. "Boots and Muffin are good. They don't bite unless you yell." Scout sat beside him, tail still, like a soldier awaiting command. That night, when Ellie had fallen asleep again, her hand on Scout's back, the pups cradled close, Lucas stepped out onto the cabin's porch, his phone in hand. He dialed a number he hadn't called in nearly a year. "Hello?" A woman's voice answered after 2 rings, tired but alert. "Sarah, it's me, Lucas." There was a beat of surprise. "Lucas, you okay?" Sarah Ortega had once worked side by side with Lucas's late wife at the veterinary clinic. Now in her 30s, Sarah was slender and wiry, with olive-toned skin and thick black curls, often tied back in a colorful scarf. Her glasses were usually smudged, her fingers always ink-stained from scribbling on patient charts or sketchbooks. Though blunt at times, Sarah had a soft spot for animals and broken people, 2 things the clinic always had plenty of. "I need a favor," Lucas said. "Quiet one." He explained everything, Ellie, the puppies, the man in the woods, and now this backpack. "I need DNA confirmation," he said. "Can you test the girl and the dogs? Compare them to anything Emma may have on file, especially for a woman named Marie Ellis." "I remember that name," Sarah said slowly. "She brought in 2 shepherd pups. Quiet lady, real gentle. She came with a kid, probably Ellie. I'll check the archive. You can still access Emma's records?" "I never stopped," Sarah replied. "I've been digitizing everything slowly. I'll run the test tonight and cross-check. Give me a few hours." Lucas nodded. "Thanks, Sarah. This means a lot." The wind picked up as he ended the call. He stepped back inside and checked on Ellie. She hadn't moved. Scout shifted only to reposition himself between the door and the couch, a silent barrier against everything the night might bring. It was nearly midnight when the phone buzzed. "Lucas," Sarah said, You're going to want to sit down." "I'm sitting." "I found a genetic match between the girl and the two dogs, Boots and Muffin. They're siblings, and registered under Marie Ellis." Lucas felt a weight lift from somewhere deep inside. "There's more," Sarah said. "There's a partial match between the girl and the female pup's same maternal line. It's strong. Marie's definitely the mom." Silence settled between them for a beat. "You were right," Sarah added. "She's Marie's kid, no doubt." Lucas exhaled slowly. "Thank you, Sarah." "Be careful," she said. "If someone left them out there, they weren't running from nothing." Lucas hung up and stared into the fire. Scout lifted his head, watching him closely. Lucas nodded once, more to himself than anyone else. "We're not done," he whispered, "but we're not lost either." The fire had long since burned down to glowing embers, casting faint shadows across the cabin walls. It was the hour before dawn, when the world was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like it was waiting. Lucas dozed lightly in his chair, Scout resting beside the door as always, eyes half-lidded but still watching. The pups snored in a small pile near the hearth, and Ellie whimpered in her sleep. At first, it was soft, a twitch of her legs beneath the quilt. Then her breath caught, sharp and thin. Her hand reached into empty air, as if searching for something already lost. "Mama! No! Mama!" She jerked upright with a cry, eyes wild, body shaking. Muffin barked once, startled. Boots pressed close to her side. Lucas was by her in an instant. "Ellie! Hey, it's okay," he said, kneeling by the couch. "You're safe." Her eyes darted around the room, unfocused. Then she pointed straight at the window. "There, at the hill," she gasped. "She's there. Mama's there." Lucas frowned. "Ellie, what did you see?" "She was lying in the snow, blood on her face. She was cold. She was calling me." Ellie's voice was breaking. "She said I forgot her." Lucas gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "It was just a dream." "No," she said firmly, shaking her head. "Not just. It's where the man ran, over the ridge." Lucas met Scout's eyes. The dog was already standing, tail down, ears up. It was still dark when Lucas called Sheriff Nancy Griggs. She answered on the second ring. "This better not be about raccoons again," she said groggily, then heard the tone in Lucas's voice. "What is it?" "I need you out here. We may have a lead. Ellie had a nightmare, saw her mom bleeding, near the ridge, same place Dean ran toward, and I believe her." "Dreams aren't evidence," Nancy muttered. "But, coming from her, I'll bring the file." Nancy arrived just after sunrise, her truck grumbling through the fresh snow like an old bear. She stepped out wearing her usual tan parka, her silver braid tucked beneath a wool cap, and her leather gloves already dusted in powder. Her face, lined but sharp, gave nothing away. "I pulled Marie Ellis's old file," she said, handing Lucas a folder. "You were right to dig deeper. Marie made a call to dispatch 5 months before she vanished. Reported a man named Dean Halverson threatening her outside her trailer. She never followed up. But here's the part I missed." Nancy flipped to the final page. The last number dialed from her phone the night she disappeared? Dean's. Lucas exhaled slowly. "And we let him walk away. We didn't have her. We didn't have anything," Nancy said flatly. "Until now." Scout barked once, sharp and urgent. He was standing by the tree line, tail stiff, eyes locked on a break in the snowbank leading up the ridge. Lucas glanced back. "He's got something." They hiked up the ridge with 2 deputies Nancy had brought along. Cole Grant, a lanky, freckled man with a too-big hat and a habit of humming nervously, and Tanya Morris, compact and sharp-eyed, the youngest deputy in the county but easily the toughest in the room. She didn't talk much, but her boots made clean tracks in the snow, and she carried herself like someone born for crisis. Scout led the way, weaving between trees and frozen brush with purpose. Ellie stayed back at the cabin under Nancy's protection, Lucas had insisted. She'd already seen enough. About 30 minutes into the hike, Scout stopped suddenly. His nose pointed toward a low outcrop of rock, half covered in snow, nestled between 2 dead trees. Lucas approached carefully. The opening wasn't much taller than his waist, but the dark mouth of the cave-like hollow reached back into the stone. The air around it was colder somehow, like it hadn't been touched by the sun in weeks. Scout sniffed once, then growled low and stepped aside. Lucas knelt, flashlight in hand. At first, he saw only rock and moss and old leaves. Then, something red beneath a dusting of snow. He reached in and pulled it free. A scarf, faded cranberry wool, torn along one edge. Lucas turned it over. On the inside, stitched into the tag with blue thread, were 2 small letters. M.E. Marie Ellis, he whispered. Tanya stepped up, scanning the perimeter. Blood, she said, pointing to a smear near the base of the rock. Dried. Old. But definitely blood. Further inside, they found a small metal first aid kit, half buried in dirt. The lid was dented, smeared with rust and dried red. Inside, gauze, antibiotic cream, and a cracked mirror stained with a dark smear on the handle. Cole shifted uncomfortably. Think she was hiding here? Or someone made her, Lucas said darkly. Nancy knelt beside him. This changes things. Lucas nodded. We bring this in. We reopen the case formally. Dean doesn't walk again. Scout stepped forward, sniffed the scarf again, then let out a soft, almost mournful sound. Lucas reached down and rested a hand on his head. We're close, he said. Real close. Snow still lined the edges of the forest, but it no longer ruled the land. Buds were beginning to push through frozen soil. The wind, though still crisp, carried the scent of thawed earth and the distant promise of blooming wildflowers. At the base of Snowfield Ridge, the cabin stood steady, scarred by time, but warmed by something deeper than fire. Inside, the air buzzed with quiet anticipation. Ellie sat by the window, one hand gently stroking Muffin's ear while Boots rested his head on her lap. Her red hoodie was now faded, but her eyes had regained a brightness Lucas hadn't seen since the day he found her. She turned as the door opened. It wasn't the creak of hinges that caught her attention. It was the sound of boots she now knew well. Sheriff Nancy Griggs entered first, followed by a nurse in a navy windbreaker, then a woman with chestnut hair streaked with silver and kindness in every line on her face. Marie Ellis. She was thinner than the photo Lucas had seen and walked with a noticeable limp. A pale scar cut across her forehead, barely hidden beneath her uneven bangs. But her eyes, hazel, brimming, fixed on Ellie. The girl stood frozen, lips parted. Then, with a suddenness that broke the room in two, she ran. "Mama!" Marie dropped her cane. She caught her daughter mid-stride, folding her into an embrace so tight and trembling that the nurse instinctively looked away. Lucas did not. Marie sobbed into Ellie's hair. "I'm so sorry. I tried to come back. I never stopped trying." Ellie clung to her, whispering through tears. "You didn't leave me. I knew you didn't." Scout watched from the corner, his head tilted. When Ellie saw him, she broke from her mother's arms just long enough to wrap her arms around his neck. "You brought them to me," she whispered. "You're not just a dog. You're family." The arrest had been quiet, almost anticlimactic. Dean Halvorsen, now scruffier, thinner, and hollow-eyed, was found camping deep in the range near a hunting blind. When confronted with the scarf and first aid kit, his facade cracked. It had started as an argument. Marie had told him she was leaving, that she was done hiding and done fearing. Dean, filled with rage, pushed her. He didn't mean for her to fall, but she did, over the ledge. When he looked down and didn't see her move, he ran. But Marie had landed on a frozen embankment, badly hurt, but alive. A retired lumberman named Earl Buckley, who lived off-grid and rarely ventured into town, found her. Earl, a grizzled man with hands like bark and a heart soft as flannel, took her in and tended her wounds. She had no memory of her name for weeks. When it returned, she was too weak to travel and too afraid that Dean might be watching. When news reached Earl's cabin of the investigation into a missing woman named Marie Ellis, he drove her to the nearest ranger station himself. Nancy stood beside Lucas as the reunion unfolded. Her voice was low. The DA's pressing charges, manslaughter, obstruction, abuse, he's done. Lucas nodded, his arms folded. I hope she can heal, and the kid. They already are, Nancy said, then looked sideways at him. You got the transfer notice, huh? Lucas didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, it was quiet. Yeah. Portland. Promotion. Desk job. You taking it? He looked at Ellie, now nestled beside her mother and flanked by two sleepy pups. Scout lay at her feet, his tail thumping slowly. No, he said. I'm not. Nancy raised a brow. You sure? She might need time, Lucas said, eyes still on Ellie. Recovery doesn't happen overnight. If Marie agrees, I'll apply for temporary guardianship. Nancy studied him for a beat. You'd be good for her. She's been good for me, Lucas replied. A month later, in a ceremony held at the Snowfield Town Hall, Scout was awarded the title of Honorary Civilian K-9. The mayor, a stout man named Franklin Dale with a booming voice and oversized glasses, gave the speech. In the line of duty, many are called, few answer, and sometimes the bravest soul among us doesn't wear a badge but walks on 4 legs. Scout, wearing a blue ribbon and a new leather collar, sat proudly beside Lucas. Ellie stood next to them, holding Boots in her arms, while Muffin tried to chew on the hem of her dress. When the applause settled and the crowd dispersed, Ellie knelt beside Scout once more. You didn't just save me, she whispered, kissing the top of his head. You gave me back everything. Lucas didn't say anything. He just reached down and scratched behind Scout's ears, knowing that some heroes don't need words, only heart. And, as the spring sun stretched over the ridges, melting the last remnants of the long, cruel winter, the cabin on the hill filled with laughter, barks, and the sound of hope beginning again. Sometimes God doesn't part the seas or send thunder from the skies. Sometimes he sends a child wrapped in red, carrying 2 puppies and a broken heart. Sometimes he sends a dog named Scout, and sometimes he places a weary man in the right place at the right time, not to save, but to be saved too. This story is more than a tale of survival. It is a reminder that miracles often come in quiet ways, through the loyalty of a dog, the resilience of a little girl, the healing between strangers who become family. When all seems lost in the cold, he warms us through each other. So, if this story touched your heart, if you believe love still finds a way, type Amen in the comments to bless every soul out there still searching for their spring. May God bless you with a Scout in your darkest moment, and may you be someone's light when their world turns cold. Don't forget to share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of faith, redemption, and love that endures. Because sometimes the smallest voices carry the loudest prayers. And today you were meant to hear this one.